And Chip, thank you so much for participating and agreeing to do this free webinar for everyone. We're all very grateful to have you.
Well, I'm grateful. It's an absolute pleasure to be with everybody, and I've been looking forward to it. I really have.
Oh, that's great.
And I just got off vacation, so I'm like, nothing.
Love it. Perfect. So Chip, I'll just share a little bit to start. He worked very closely with Sydney Banks and was mentored by him from 1975 all the way to 2009, and did a lot of teaching with him. Chip's also the president of the Three Principles Foundation and also co-founder of the Three Principles School on Salt Spring Island, as well as doing work with his wife, Jan, individuals, couples, leaders. And, I know Chip in a couple of different ways, definitely through the Three Principles School, which I highly recommend. And also, you've been a guest speaker in some of the masterminds that I've done with Barb Patterson. And, one of my favorite things that you've talked about is how after meeting Sydney Banks, life became like living and, riding on the magic carpet. And I think that just encapsulates so much of the shift and transformation that happens when we just start to get more perspective and listen less to the noise in our mind and connect more deeply with our heart and what's true for us, and live life from that place. So I think you speak that beautifully. And I very much enjoyed participating in the school and the focus of dropping into the feeling of what the understanding is about and the simplicity of that. And I think you really embody that and share that so beautifully. So I'm looking forward to anything that you'd like to share with us today, and we'll go from there. And so for everyone else, Chip and I will have a conversation, share for a little bit, and then probably about halfway or so through the call, I'm going to open it up for questions, and that's when you remember to push the raised hand button. So go ahead, Chip. You can start with your nothingness, and we'll go from there.
Well, it's the thing that mystifies me to this day. And I was thinking about, I kind of committed to not thinking about the three principles for 2 weeks on my vacation, and I was pretty good about it, actually. And but one thing did coming back to me, and that's how change, in essence, is very mystical. Like, when I look back, I can't think of a particular thing I made an effort to change when we met Sid. I can't think of a particular subject that I worked on, including the things in our marriage. Something just changed. It was to me, it was a spiritual process, in the sense that when we find our way home to that feeling, and we do get quiet, our thoughts are automatically reordered. There's no need to try and reorder them. They're automatically reordered. And so when you suggested or mentioned that maybe I should share my story from the beginning, that's what came to me first, is looking back on it. It is a magic carpet ride. There's no way to intellectually really explain what happened, but I'm going to do my best by just sharing the story. For those that don't know me, and there's a few here that do, but most don't probably. I was raised in a home where there was a lot of alcoholism, violence. I was the oldest of 11 kids, and that was my experience growing up. So as a young man, it's not hard to see how I would be aggressive, angry, depressed a lot. That's the state of mind I lived in. Interestingly enough, I've often said during my talks that discovering the principles or having your first insight is much the same as falling in love. Because when I first met Jan, for 2 or 3 years, I dropped all of that. It just went away. And we just had this wonderful time for the first couple of years of our marriage. And who knows why that is, other than you're in love, so you suspend all that thinking, right? And so for us, the first couple of years of our marriage were really great. And then slowly I began to slip back into my depression and anger and paranoia about what was to come in life. Worry about what was to come in life. And so Jan, one day, we were living on the Gulf Islands, one day, just by accident, had to, with a chore, go from the little island we were living on over to Salt Spring Island and take care of something. And she set out to do that. And I was home with our son. And she ended up in Sid's living room. She had never met him before, neither one. We had heard about this Scotsman who was enlightened. I just went, yeah, right. You know, yeah, a welder that has total enlightenment. You know, like after studying Zen and going through all that kind of trying and effort and hours on our knees in the Zendo, Jan encounters a guy that, oh yeah, well, it just happened to him, right? And that was very, very unacceptable to me. So anyway, Jan meets Sid, and sometimes she'll tell her story, but the essence of it is she's in her living room with 7 or 8 people that are sitting there with Sid. She doesn't know what's going on in Sid's living room, that is. And it's just casual conversation, and he starts to talk in that Sidney Banks kind of way about the nature of life, the true nature of life. And Jan just started hearing things. She started hearing like the wisdom she'd looked at in many ways throughout her life. And she suddenly had this insight that it wasn't coming from this guy, this Sidney Banks. It was coming from within her. Right? And Jan experienced a really deep change and a feeling that life was going to be great, which, considering what it was that morning when we parted ways, was quite a jump. And so anyway, that night she came home, and I was in a very miserable mood. I was not a happy camper. And she started telling me that, you know, she was excited on the way home because she thought I'd go, oh, great, you found it, you know. And so she started telling me that essentially that we really didn't have any problems, that it was thought. And I just, oh man, I lost it. I just got upset and angry. And what are you talking about? You know, it's just thought. And she just excused herself and went off to bed. And for some reason, it really disturbed me. You know, this whole conversation really disturbed me. So I went to bed that night and woke up in the morning, and there was like singing coming out of the kitchen. I thought, there's no singing in my house, you know? And it was Jan in this mood, this buoyant mood. So I went down and challenged her and tried to start an argument. And looking back at it now, there was a period of 2 weeks where I desperately wanted Jan to argue with me, to fight about this. I wanted her back where I understood the relationship as it was. I knew where the handles were, right? And so every once in a while, I could get her upset a little bit. I'd throw something out, and I'd see her get upset, and I'd feel very self-satisfied, right? And then I'd see this moment, and it was, the only way I can describe it was I could just see her in a state of, I'm not going there anymore. I don't live there anymore, you know? And this was really, really disturbing to me. So this went on for a couple of weeks, and I just kept getting more lonely and more feeling like this is it. You know, we really can't get back together now. It's done for. I'm going to lose my son and my daughter. That's the state of mind I was in. And so we ended up at a party one night, and the couple that Jan had been talking to about this came into the party. And I always felt very superior to these 2 people, right? I just thought they were the only 2 people I knew who were still married who were worse than us. And so I wasn't impressed by the idea that Jan was talking to them and learning. And so they walked in this room. I was playing music with a group of musicians, and I got this jolt of fear when I saw them, and I couldn't understand that because I always felt, you know, superior. And it disturbed me so much when they walked in. They just looked different. I don't know how to explain it. That I went out into the kitchen and pretended I was getting some food, and the guy followed me out, and I literally could not stand to be in his presence. And I left the party and went home without Jan. And she came back a little bit later. She said, what happened to you? I said, oh, it was a terrible party. She said, no, it wasn't. It was a great party. I said, you know, she went off to bed, and I couldn't sleep. I stayed awake all night. Something was disturbing me at such a level I could not. I didn't even try to go to bed. And Jan came down in the morning. I've been up all night. She said, didn't you come to bed? And I mouthed something silly about I wasn't tired or whatever. And I probably by then drank about 10 cups of coffee. So I literally was vibrating, right? And over my lips just came something. I I had no idea why I said this, but I said, I want to go talk to Bob and Betty. And Jan was like thrilled. Oh, he's going to finally go talk about it, right? In my mind, immediately what I did was, I'm going to go tell these people how silly all this is, butt out of my marriage, and I don't want to hear any more about it. And so Jan doesn't know this, so we get in our truck and we drive over to this couple's house, and they're so nice. They have Danish on and coffee, and we walk in, and next thing I know, Jan sits down on the couch with this fella. It was like an open floor plan, and I'm still in the dining room, and I turn around, this woman's holding 2 cups of coffee and setting them down on the table, and I think, oh, I don't want to sit and talk to this woman about this. But I sat down, and she said something to the effect of, what's on your mind, Chip? That was really the wrong thing to say, because I just went up one side and down the other about how stupid all this was. And finally, I made this really just strong statement. I said, you need to butt out of my marriage and quit talking to my wife about our relationship. And she just looked at me and she said, Chip, I have never had a single conversation in any way, shape, or form with Jan about your relationship. And I knew she was telling me the truth. You know, it was so obvious she was telling me the truth that it just kind of took the wind out of my sails. And so I kind of sat back in the chair, and she actually put her finger in my face and she said, Chip, the only thing that stands between you and Jan and all the love and happiness in this world is thought. And again, I thought, what a stupid thing to say. But I happened to look over her shoulder as I was reacting to this, and I saw Jan, and this feeling just rushed in, and I welled up. And I remember thinking, man, I do not want to cry in front of this woman. So I stood up and I told them what a bunch of bleep this all was, and I walked out. Jan followed me out after probably apologizing for my behavior, scolded me a little bit, and got in the truck, and we drove home. And I stayed in that negative state for another week and a half or so. And then one day, I was sitting on the couch. It was really early morning, and Jan was on the floor with our little son, who was, I don't know, about 3 at the time or something. And they were playing on the floor, and the light was coming in the window at a really steep angle, and it was shining in their hair, and it got my attention. And I was looking at them, and that feeling just rushed in, and I filled up. And I remember thinking, all I have to do is surrender. There's nothing to do. And everything in my life changed. I mean, everything in my life changed after that. It's so simple. And I really can't explain what I saw in that moment. I know now, looking back, that it was my first experience of really seeing. I saw my wife and my daughter. Oh, my son, I mean, my wife and my son. I didn't see my thinking about them. You know, I didn't see my past, but I saw them. And I didn't know what to call it, but I knew I was seeing something. So that's pretty much how it started for us.
So beautiful to kind of just, even as you're sharing it now, dropping into that feeling and experience of seeing without the filters so strong of memory and all of that thinking and just being present. I mean, it's just such a beautiful feeling. Mm-hmm. So from that experience, sort of, you know, I'd love to hear a little bit more in terms of, you know, then what?
Well, you know,
and you can give us the abridged version. I know.
I'll try. You know, I still couldn't understand how Sid Banks could know anything. It was really difficult for me. And I found an opportunity to test him. I helped him with a fireplace, rebuild his fireplace. And I had about half a dozen deep questions to ask him about consciousness raising. And we were at his house. His family wasn't there. We were repairing his fireplace. He was shocked. He didn't know who I was. I called him out of nowhere and said, I'm going to come and help you fix your fireplace, right? And he knew Jan, but he didn't really remember me. And so we would take a break and I would ask him this really wise question, you know, about consciousness raising or, you know, levels of consciousness or whatever. And he would look, I remember the first time he looked at his cup of tea and I thought, oh, he's really considered my question, right? And he looks at me just with all the sincerity in the world. He says, you know, Chip, this is the best cup of tea I've ever had. I thought, oh, he's just trying to avoid my question, right? And so I waited. We worked on the fireplace some more. We stopped for lunch, and I thought, okay, we got some more time now. I'm going to ease into it. I'm going to ask him another question, which I did. We were eating lunch, and we're sitting by the ocean. And so I don't remember what the questions were, but I asked him some other consciousness raising question. And he was looking out at the sea, and he just turned to me and said, have you ever seen the sea this color? It's the most beautiful sea I've ever seen. It's so beautiful. And I tried to ask the question again. He just totally ignored me and just kept talking about the beauty that was in front of us. And I thought, okay, he's a really nice guy. I'm not going to embarrass him anymore by asking him questions he doesn't know the answers to. So when we finished on the last night, I was exhausted. And Sid was jumping up and down. He was so excited about the fireplace. He kept going on about how beautiful it was. It looked 300 years old to him and all this. And I kept thinking, it's just a fireplace, you know? And I was exhausted. I went out and I looked out the window at the sea, and there was a ship going by. And for some reason, it just really drew my attention in. So I started watching this ship. And Sid was behind me putting kindling in the fireplace, which I asked him not to because I thought it would crack the new mortar. And he's building a fire, right? And I can hear the wood cracking in the match, and I'm looking out at this thing, and I hear, I turned around, and he was sitting with his back to the wall, facing the same way towards the sea. And he looked at me and he said, Chip, isn't it nice to know that you've never done anything wrong in your entire life? And my mind went, oh my God, you have no idea, right? But again, this amazing feeling just kind of washed over me. And I became very emotional. I couldn't move. I felt like my feet were glued to the floor. And Sid just kind of hopped up and said, well, good night. And he went off to bed. And I was staying in his son's room, and I'm still standing there. And all I could do was sit in the chair. And it was this strange paradox, because my mind was saying, what a silly thing to say. How could you know any? I mean, who hasn't done anything wrong? But part of me knew that was the truth. Part of me knew that was a profound truth. I just knew it. And I went off to bed, and I just had this amazing sleep. I mean, I slept like I'd never slept before. And I just felt really different in the morning. Now, I didn't really see what that was for a long time, but later on I came to see, because we were learning to work with people this way. But that was the very first time that anybody had spoken past my mask to my true self. That's who he was addressing. He could care less about Chipman, the personality, right? So from there, I really started listening then, because I knew that I had been told something. I really didn't understand it. I just knew I'd been told something at a really deep level, and that something existed that I did not know about. In spite of all the years at the Zendo and all the studying of the spiritual way and so on and so forth, this was a truth that came from somewhere else, from a deeper level of understanding.
Mm-hmm. I think that was something that I really noticed when I came across this understanding as well, because I had my own journeys of, exploring, seeking. But this understanding hit me on the experiential level in a way that I hadn't been impacted before, and I couldn't explain it, but I just knew that it was real. I knew that something was happening inside of me that was beyond my intellect, but that I was being transformed by it. And it's so profound, yet so simple. And I know a lot of your work is to really share this understanding and preserve the simplicity and the practicality and share it in the way that Sydney Banks was intending for it to be shared. And I'd love for you to share whatever comes to mind for you along those lines. There's many seasoned practitioners on this webinar, many new people to this, so I'm sure it'd be beneficial for both.
Well, I was peeking through the screens here, and there's some very experienced, very from the heart teachers on this call, so it's an honor just to be on the call with them. But you know, the simplicity, that was what Sid was adamant about at the school, you know, that there'd be one place where the simplicity was preserved as much as possible. And we've done our best, Elsie and I, and occasionally Jan. We've really done our best to come from that and to sort of have that serve as our guide as we start each episode of the school. I mean, there are things we talk about. We occasionally say, you know, we need to address this, or it wouldn't be nice to kind of get this across. But in essence, it always comes down to the same thing. And that is, when you share stories and when you talk about the principles, you go into a feeling yourself. Okay? I mean, that's step number one, is to be in that feeling. And when you're in that feeling and you share from that feeling, you really don't have to analyze what you're going to say or how you're going to say it. It just comes. It's just automatic. And when that happens in a room and a group of people get that feeling and slip out of their thinking for even a split second, then what happens is their true self becomes evident to them, becomes hearable. Right? And so when the school is at its best, that's really what's happening, is people are not hearing myself or Elsie or Sid. They're hearing themselves. And that, if you look back at all Sid's talks, when I remember being at the talks, that's what he was always doing, was creating a feeling, sharing enough about the knowledge and wisdom about this other world, this deeper, truer world that lies within, that you would be drawn into that feeling. And you wouldn't figure it out. You wouldn't think in a different way. You would go to that state, okay, where your true self was hearable, and it would start to speak to you. And so that ability to be quiet enough, if you want to call it an ability, if you want to be quiet enough to just be in that state of mind, is my definition of wisdom. Wisdom is to be neutral, absolutely neutral. And the beauty of it is, you know, it's a bit of a paradox that to solve the problems we live with, like my marriage before this all happened, with we all have our things. We're not used to the idea of suspending our thinking about it completely to find an answer for it. And yet that's really what happens with this understanding, is we get quiet enough and neutral enough that we can look back at all of it and see it with understanding. Right? We're actually looking at it from a new perch, you know, from a new place. And then for sure it's your wisdom, because there's nothing else exists in that moment. Right? But it's not passive in the sense that it doesn't, obviously, that it doesn't affect the world of form. It does, you know. Like when I look back on how quickly my marriage was not only healed, it became so much more than I could ever imagine, with no effort. You know, I'm not going to, I think I'll change this, or I think I'll change that, or gee, I hope I don't do that. It was none of that. It just was there, because we looked at the world from a new place. And we saw, I think one of the things that comes with looking at the world from that neutral place is a deep, deep appreciation of the psychological innocence of all of us. Right? We're all psychologically innocent. We're all innocently living through the lens of our thinking, through our experience. And the idea that we can stop that and look back at it from neutral, and from the true self, not from the imagined self. To me, that's the ultimate form of simplicity. Right? And what we find, what I love about, you know, Sid used to talk about no thought. And I remember saying, well, Sid, there can't be no thought. You know, you wouldn't be alive. And he said, you're right. Oh, no, I'm right. He said, no, but it's a deeper dimension of thought. Right? It's a deeper dimension of thought that's not coming from memory. It's pure thought. It's where genius comes from. It's where creativity comes from. It's where how we create the world comes from. Right? And that, I love that, because before that I was having problems with, what do you mean no thought? No thought from here, a deeper dimension of thought. And that's wisdom, creativity, insight, you can call it. That's when we all, in the three principles world, we're always talking about insight. To me, that's what it is looking at the world from that neutral place, from that deeper dimension of thought. And so I won't tell the story, but just to show how that works in terms of change, I held such a passionate hatred for my father for a good part of my life, right? And one night in laying in bed, I just had this insight. I had this insight that, and it was so simple. If you can imagine the way I grew up, the volumes and volumes and volumes of thinking, habits toward the world, how I acted and lived that came out of that relation, like volumes, right? And one night, not, I forget how long, maybe a year after meeting Sid or something like that, I had this little simple insight. My father was living in a world that had been handed to him. He didn't know any world existed outside of that. He lived in that madness. And I just happened to be born in his house. Ooh, I remember just feeling this profound peace after that very singular thought, so simple but true, right? And volumes and volumes of thinking and habits just fell away. Now, I'm not saying in a bad mood I don't revisit them, because I do, but I slept like 11 or 12 hours that night. And when I woke up, I could literally feel the difference. I just felt so different. And I had a sense of what it was. Later on, I began to understand more and more what it was that, I had searched for, like all of us, a meditative state, a quiet mind for years and years and years, and spent years in the Zendo on my knees trying to find it. And with one thought that I think came from that deeper dimension of thought, something new, all of that fell away, and I found myself in a state of meditation. And from that point on, that's how I defined what a state of meditation was the beauty and the quiet that comes when you go to that quiet place. And when you have an insight that allows you to let go, in that case of volumes of thinking, right? And they go together. You can't set out to find that insight. You just have to go to the quiet and trust it and listen, and whatever is needed right now comes. And that must have been what I needed at that point in my life.
Yeah, the insight finds you.
Absolutely, that's a good way to put it. It does. It finds you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, I want to just invite people to share any reflection you might have from the webinar so far, from the understanding in general, or if you have specific questions that you have for Chip, please click the participants button and the raise hand button, and then I'll unmute you and we can go from there. And while we're waiting for people to do that, we'll see how shy of a crowd we have today, how quickly hands get raised or not. Oh, here we go, Laurel. All right. So, hi, Laurel.
Hi, Rohini. Hi, Angus, and hi, Chip. Very happy to meet you for the first time.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Elsie often references you, so I'm grateful to get to hear your story, and also so appreciate your honesty in sharing it. Just total emotional honesty. And it sounds like you had a good deal of the same sort of resistance that she did initially with Sid.
For sure.
So I've been exposed, I guess, over the last 2 years to more and more of this understanding, and have periods of time when my mind is quiet, which is, just, I heard, I see his face, Michael Neal, talk about, quote, Sid is saying, when the mind is quiet, the heart is open. And so that I really identify with that. So I often find when I wake up in the morning, or even if I happen to take a quick nap in the afternoon, that there's a lot of heaviness and negative thinking first thing in the morning, which I then move through. But a lot of it relates to unhappiness about the state of the world and the future, having young grandchildren, and everything that's going on. And you mentioned that you, prior to this understanding, had a lot of concern about these sorts of things. So I'm wondering how it impacts you now when you hear some of the really painful news for Earth and some very innocent inhabitants and how they're being treated.
Well, of course, there are terrible things going on, and from the beginning, really the beginning of time, there have been, actually. So it's not new, but it's doesn't mean it's any less painful for some people and hurtful. And I guess for me, I know I have to live in this world, okay? So going to the quiet and experiencing that insight as much as possible is my suit of armor, you know? It is my suit of armor, and it allows me to look at the innocence of all of it. And at the same time, I'll vote the way I'm going to vote. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean you're passive. You do what you can, but we can drive ourselves crazy worrying about it, and it doesn't really help. I don't mean to be preachy about that, but
yeah,
it really doesn't help. And it's possible to have those moments when you're like you're experiencing, I know you are, where you do have the quiet, and in a sense that world doesn't exist. But my theory about the broader theory, now this is Chipman, this isn't the three principles, this is my broader theory about it, is I actually believe the world level of consciousness is rising. Okay? And what we see is a reaction to that fact. So I guess I'm an optimist in that way. When people are finding more and more truth about what they want in life and throughout the planet, the people who take their power from greed, and which is just insecurity and lostness, they will fight it. They will be upset by it. And that's what I personally believe we're observing. But in spite of that, or regardless of that, I should say, taking care of our own mental health, being happy within ourselves is still the best course, because if we have to handle it, we have to handle it. Life is a contact sport, as Sid would often say. And the more we take care of ourselves, the better we do handle that. And one other thing I would say, just listening to you talking about those moments when it gets busy in your head and you think about the negativity, you didn't say this, but I would, for all of us, I would be careful not to judge ourselves when that happens too. There's a phenomenon I see in the principles once in a while where people find the principles, they have an insight and they feel really good, and then they slip back into some negative thinking or some insecurity. And it's, oh my God, I've lost it, or I'm not as good as these other people in the three principles, and so on and so forth. Part of what I'm working with, I think with every client I'm working with, is to be easy on ourselves. We're human beings. There's a level of accepting our humanity that's really important, that allows us to grow more, as opposed to, again, fighting it and feeling bad about our thinking. It is what it is. And relaxing about it and just listening more, it'll come less, and it'll go less deep when it does come. So for what it's worth, I'm talking about myself here, you know?
yes, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. I feel I have a strong sense of mission and a passion for it, and the belief that I can grow in the ability to make a positive impact. And that for me is, lifts me out of the pain of it. Hearing you quote Sid as saying that you've never made a mistake, were those the words?
Never done anything wrong in your life.
Right. Well, I've had the challenge in terms of promoting my own work, have not been very good at it, have not been very good at accepting, at implementing the help that's been given me. So that has felt like a deficit. And then the consequent necessity to do other things other than my passion in order to stay even somewhat viable in the world. and looking to find a deeper level of surrender that enables me to do what I have been resistant to doing and to receive more of what I desire. And so in my times when I'm in prayer, it really is to reach that greater level of surrender. And you talked about just experiencing it in an instant. I'm wondering if there's any kind of, I guess how to is the wrong thing to ask in a 3-principle conversation, but any sort of suggestions or directions.
Yeah, and just be kind to yourself.
Okay.
Be patient with yourself. That's all. There really is no model or technique. There's simply being kind, loving yourself enough to just get quiet and just be in the moment. And it's hard to imagine how that affects these things that we're talking about, like how we do this and my practice and so on and so forth. But I know that the more we turn inside, the more we experience that, the more beauty comes to us, including the things that we get to do.
Yes.
I can honestly say that after all these years with Jan, all the amazing things we've gotten to do, it's just, I think about it, I think, oh my God, how did we get this light? But we never went looking for one of them. Sid would say, be ordinary. He would say that to us so often, just be ordinary. Like, enjoy the moment that you're in right now. Learn from the playground that you're in right now, and the rest will come. And it sounds kind of airy-fairy, but that's the way our lives have worked, to be honest.
And so in terms of getting quiet, again, there's no formula for how to do that, just maybe not focus on the static.
Well, there's no formula, but there is something that's valuable, I think, and that's deep listening. Like, that's why I love Sid's materials and his books, is he's speaking from that state, the one we're all looking for, right? And so I think there's a magical thing in the fact that you cannot listen at a truly deep level and think at the same time. They are mutually exclusive activities. And that's a wonderful thing. Mm-hmm. So, there are days when I listen and I'm looking at how I should fix my fireplace while Sid's talking, or I wonder who I'm going to have lunch with. There are days when I'm doing that. And there are other times when I just feel it and I just listen. I just really listen, And I listen enough that whatever noise is going on falls away. It's not all the time. It's not. Mm-hmm. But it's enough of the time to help me grow and see the world in a different light more and more. So listening is, it's a portal to a quiet mind. Deep listening is a portal to a quiet mind. So thank you so much. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Thank you so much. Okay, I don't see any other hands raised. So if anybody else would like to ask a question, please click the raise hand button and we'll go from there. And while we're waiting, Chip, one of the things that I'd love to hear you share more about is around, I've heard a lot of practitioners talk about the importance of sharing from your grounding and not sharing from beyond your grounding. And I think for me, part of why this understanding was so impactful is something to do with that, of staying with what's real and true and alive inside. And I know for myself, I do my best to do that when I'm sharing and working with people, but I'd love to hear what your thoughts are about.
Well, I've been guilty of both, for sure, of sharing from my head and beyond what I know, and fortunately at times sharing just from what's in this moment right now, and of course that's obviously the best. But the one thing that Sid said to me about that stuck with me through all these years, and I hear it with new people that are doing their best to share the principles. I remember he said to me, it doesn't take much. I went, what do you mean it doesn't take much? And he just looked at me, he says, Chip, it doesn't take much. You don't have to define and talk about all the details you think the principles are. Like he used the Hawaiian term, he would say, talk story, tell a story from the heart of change. Like once I was around it for a while, I lost perspective of the sense that, for instance, if I had never heard of this before, and somebody came along to me and I was in a miserable state with my marriage and everything, and somebody said to me, you could have a single insight that would change your whole life and your problems would begin to evaporate. That would have been a shocking statement, you know. If somebody had a feeling that told me that they'd actually experienced that, if I could see that, that would, then the element of hope would enter my thinking automatically, right? And when hope enters anybody's thinking, it changes the direction of their thinking. So again, just telling your story, like I'll just be honest here, I think the only authority that anyone has to talk about the principles is their personal experience, right? What they have felt and experienced themselves. That's what moves people. That's what moved people about Sydney Banks in the beginning. I mean, the words, you could find the words in history from other people, you know, but his change was so profound, even physically. I mean, it was just so profound that it confused everybody around him in a really healthy way. When Jan came back from her visit with Sid, it confused me in a really healthy way because I thought I knew how the world was constructed, and suddenly there was evidence that it wasn't so. And so I became confused. But in confusion, that lovely confusion, comes the possibility of seeing something new. And so when you share something simple in your story, like when Jan and I just talk about what happened to our marriage, like people are like, what, that's possible? And so I just urge people to tell their story, to say what you know about the principles, not what you think, but what you know about them, and see what happens. Because the thing to keep in mind is you're always talking to people who already know. That's a spiritual fact, right? And when we keep in mind the spiritual fact that we're always talking to people who know in here, then it's easier to keep it simple because you're not trying to intellectually explain anything, because you can't. It's not possible to explain this intellectually. You know, I've watched many people try, and God bless them. They want to serve, but people have to feel something and then experience, like you said, experiential. They have to experience that deeper level. Experiencing it and thinking that it might exist are two completely different things. Two completely different things. And so when we're willing to see that it really doesn't take much, you know.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, a little bit goes a very long way. Jor's got his hand raised, so I'm gonna go to Jor. Hi, Jor.
Hi. Thanks, Chip. That was such a lovely talk. What really stood up for me was your initial sharing that I find that I'm challenged with sometimes, and now I see it sometimes reversed in some relationship when, you know, when Jen was in a good mood, and that really seemed to upset you even more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I must say that just, you know, diving into the principles for the last couple of years, at least for me, that bad mood from other people's moods really lasts way less, way shorter. I don't carry days as I used to. But I do find that it sometimes even work reverse. I'm in a good mood, and for whatever reason, it will, for no obvious reason, will trigger my partner. And I see this also sometimes in other settings. And I used to want to, you know, get in reaction or get into the argument, and it still comes up at times. But now that when I'm in a good mood, at least I'm kind of ignoring it. I'm just trying, you know, there's no point of engaging. But then sometimes it gets it to heat even more. So I wonder if you have any take on that, because when you share that, I was like, laughing. I've been there so many times in the past, and now I'm less. But I don't know. It even bugs me how come I can be in a good mood and suddenly switch in a second to a bad mood because of somebody else reaction or mood. it just fascinates me.
Yeah, that's a big club, reacting to other people's moods. It's a huge club. It's just part of life, and the fact that once in a while you just don't bite, you don't go there, you just take care of yourself. I think you just do that more. I mean, it's I could tell you this. In the beginning, Jan became an expert at ignoring my bad moods. She just became an expert. And even when I did catch her up in it once in a while, I would see that mood. She would go, just, I'm going to go for a walk or whatever. So that's my example. I mean, I just saw that Jan was not, I mean, I don't mean to say that she was like doing a battle in her head, but she just wasn't willing to surrender her health to my craziness. She just wasn't willing to do that. And that was the greatest gift she could have given me, because again, with that whole scenario with the relationship, the fact that her health was sustained in spite of my anger and my upset and my depression is what changed that confusion to curiosity. The fact that her health was sustained, right? Because after a while, it was undeniable. At first, I was like, yeah, this is an act, like this won't last, right? But after a while, I began to see that it was really a true thing, that she was in a different world. I think that's all we can do. I wish there was a formula, but if there is, I'm not the guy that knows. Just take care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you. That makes sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Dror. All right, Ellen has her hand raised. I'll go to Ellen next.
I'm looking through the names here.
She should pop up. Hi, Ellen.
Here I am.
Okay. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Before I ask my question, I just wanted to say, what you just shared about your relationship with Jan is just so beautiful as a illustration that it just takes one person to shift in a relationship.
Absolutely.
Because so many times when I'm working with people and they're like, how can my relationship change if he or she doesn't have a conversation with you or doesn't understand this? And I'm just like, I know it doesn't make sense until, yeah. So thank you for that beautiful illustration. So I was really moved earlier when you said you can't listen at a deep level, or you can't listen at a deep level and think at the same time. And I just, something moved, and can we just play around in there for a minute?
Well, I remember the first time I really experienced that. I had gone to, by then, maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 of Sid's talks. And I mean, what was going on in my head was, well, yeah, that sounds like Buddha. I think Jesus Christ said something like that, And I don't know if I buy that. And I'm going to put this on the shelf over here and look at it later. And so one night, it was before it was off the island, or much off the island. And there might have been 30 people in the room, and Sid was talking, and I was doing the same thing. I was analyzing it and comparing it. And I don't know why, but it just stopped. And I'll just tell you what it looked like to me. It just stopped, and his face, to my eye, went soft, and the rest of the room disappeared. And I don't remember a single word after that. I just know that when he finished talking, the feeling was profound. I literally, that was the first time it hit me so hard. I could do nothing but weep. As a matter of fact, I got out of the hall as quickly as possible because I was still too much in my macho to let people see me that way, right? But I think that was the first time I ever really listened, without measuring it, analyzing it, thinking about it, trying to figure out what does it mean, just listen. I think it was George I heard say something really neat once, George Pransky, something to the fact, it might have been Linda, but anyway, when you listen to truth. It's better to listen to it like you listen to music. You don't, when you listen to music, you don't think, well, why'd they put that note there? And, why was, you just listen to it, right? And I don't know if that's helpful. It kind of, it feels right to me, And so like, you can't do battle with it. Like this morning, I fell into listening, but I have other mornings when I'm thinking about fixing my lawnmower while I'm listening to Sid,
Yeah.
But I know what I want, and I keep listening for that moment when it is quiet.
Yeah, I'm right now, I'm having the experience that something moved inside of me when you said something, and then I went back to try and use my intellect to figure it out, so that as if like to harness it or something. And I don't need to know. Yeah, I don't need to know. It was just like that. I just, yeah, I don't have to have language to put on it, or I don't have to have a deeper understanding of what is already a deeper understanding on a non-intellectual level.
That's so right on, Ellen. It's like, if we just can sit with it, just enjoy the feeling. We're learning at such a rate then in that feeling that it's incomprehensible, right? We can't comprehend the speed of learning from that feeling compared to the speed of learning intellectually. It's two different worlds. I think that's really beautiful what you just said, And also, again, with the be nice to yourself, when you're not and you're distracted, there's no point in fighting it. Just let it come and go. I mean, believe me, I'm talking to myself as I say that, just let it come and go. And those moments when the true listening they'll come, And sometimes when you try and fight your thinking, it takes a lot longer for what it's worth. Yeah.
I think I've been seeking an experience to share with people. I've been seeking like some level of understanding so that I can share with people that it's not intellectual. And I think I just had it. I just had, another, it wasn't the first time, but I just had I don't know.
That's lovely, Ellen. That's lovely.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. The
Yeah.
insight found you, Ellen.
For sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I don't see any. Oh, Angus. Angus just raised his hand. I think
Angus.
on you.
Hello, Angus.
Hi, Chip. How are you?
I'm good. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you too. I actually thought this is actually quite apropos for me in view of what Ellen just shared, because I can think back the first time that I came to the school, and in complete transparency, that first time I was quite new to the principles. It was kind of all going over my head, and there were these moments of where people would have these insight, and there would be these prolonged silences, that beautiful feeling that would evolve out of that. And my mind was so busy and so sped up, I just couldn't get it. It's like, what on earth is going on? What are these long, protracted silences all about? And why, it was hard for me to understand. Anyway, fast forward, a few years later, when I was able to come back again, I decided that this time out, I'm going to really close down the analytical machinery, and I'm going to really look in that direction and see what comes out of it. And so there was this really unique moment early on where you were sharing, and I can't even remember what you were sharing about, but this really strong level of emotion came up for me. And I felt myself tearing up, and it was kind of like a really extraordinary moment, because I think that in the past, and probably in that split second, there was an inclination to then go and figure out, well, why is all that emotion coming up? Why, where is that coming from? Let's look at that. Let's analyze that. And then I caught myself, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm just going to be in the moment. I'm going to have this emotion. I'm not even going to look at it. And it's kind of like, it was a great precedent to set for myself, because from that moment on, I felt like I was listening in a whole new way. I was experiencing this room in a whole new way. And I got into that really deep feeling. And then from that deep feeling, I felt like I had so many insights that really, that was a genesis point for me, that I feel my coaching practice and the way that I show up in my work just completely changed at that point, because I saw things anew and afresh that up until that point, the machinery was so much in full effect in everything that I would do and everything that I would participate in. And I just want to thank you for that school, and that and the way that you show up has just been really impactful on me.
Well, thank you, Angus. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you shared that, just to show that difference, and that it didn't sound like you were fighting the thinking. You just let it go. I love that.
Yeah. And so much more opened up to me. The insights really just started to really flow from that point forward. And I think in the past, I've really it's been hard for me to sort of disengage from that machinery, or even to occur to look in that direction in a deeper way. And I feel like, provided us the opportunity to do that. It was beautiful.
Thank you, Angus. Thank you so much. Well, I love what you said, because that's the mission of the school. You just described it. Lovely.
Yeah, so we're just about at the top of the hour. So Chip, do you want to say anything more about the school to let people know about it? Or is there anything else that you would like to share with the group?
No, the school, I think people get a sense of what it's about. It's, I tell you, what does shock people sometimes is there's not long hours. It's deep, and I think it's very full, but the hours are short. The island is gorgeous. It's a beautiful place to relax. And it's just a nice way to get away from, sometimes getting away from your routine. If you want to talk about something in the forum, that's helpful. It does help. So yeah, I'd love to see anybody there. It's comes up again in November. We're filling up now. But just to close out, I love that you were asking about simplicity. And sometimes when I'm talking with clients or at the school, this feeling comes over me, and I just have that sense. It's so simple that this is how simple it is. We're home right now. In this moment right now, we are home. Right? In this moment right now, we all have absolutely everything we could possibly need in this moment. Right? In the now. And the now is just that beautiful moment when the past isn't speaking to us and we're not worried about the future. We're just here right now, just being. And I just love that it's that simple, that we're home now. And it's just a matter of getting quiet enough and having enough gratitude for being home to truly accept it. So
beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you, Chip, for being a speaker for the free series. Thank you also for being a live weekend speaker for the 7-month program. And I just need to give a little reminder to people. I'm just getting out of vacation mode, but we've got, just a month until the program starts. And I've been speaking with people that are still considering it. So if you have any questions, or if you're interested, please reach out and let me know, because we're doing the final enrollments right now. And just, love to have you here. And these webinars are really designed to give you a feel for the teachers, but a real feel for what the intent is behind a program, which is to drop into a deeper experience of your true nature. There's no application associated with it, and the teachers all get an opportunity to go straight to the heart of what the teaching is about and share it in their own way. So if you're interested, please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you again, Chip. Really appreciate you.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be with everybody. Such a lovely group of people. And it really is an honor to be with all of you.